Last year about this time, might have even been a little bit earlier in February, we scouted for a can't miss rut tree stand setup. And we thought we had a good one. We had a lot of these ingredients I'm going to talk about here. Really 10 ingredients that you need to find your next great rut tree stand setup. And we thought we had a good one, and we did. Ended up hunting this stand twice last year during the primary rut and then during the secondary rut. So we were 2 for 2 on shooting a nice buck out of that stand. And we're over here at another property, and it's the dead of winter. You know, it's 12 degrees, 40 mile an hour, 30 mile an hour winds right now. The wind chill's brutal. We've shot a couple of videos outside today, but we're driving by this, and we have a couple areas that are really taking a good hard look. And that's what we did on the other property. We've hunted that property for 4 years or 5 years. And even though we had a lot of stands on there, there's just an area that we really wanted to set up and make sure that we had that rut cruising setup stand location. And so we're doing the same one on this property right here. We actually hunt this property. We can sit here and look at it and look at some cool areas. It's great when the leaves are off the trees, and we're looking at aerial photos. And I really want to be a little bit more invasive on this property and get into some areas that I know that I could get into, that I could sit during the rut and expect a great hunting stand setup like we did on the property last year. Now, here's 10 ingredients for a great rut cruising setup. And the one thing that I'm always looking for, and this has been going back to the early 90s, is I'm always looking for my next greatest morning stand location to hunt exclusively during the rut. There's been many of those morning stand locations that I've set up in May, we've cleared, or April or June, even July. And we've set those stands up, we've installed them, and then several months later, we're going back into that stand location and actually sitting without ever even coming close to looking at that stand location before. So the morning stand is perfect because during the rut, there's a lot of studies that show, and my own personal observations and experience match that too, that bucks actually move 3 times more in the morning hours than they do the afternoon and evening hours. And I find that to be true. Now, there's the exceptions where bucks are being pushed by neighbors, there's high hunting pressure, bucks move during the middle of the day. I find that in big wooded wilderness settings, bucks tend to move during the middle of the day more. But a lot of times when you're hunting in average hunting locations and bucks are moving all night and they're moving in the morning, to me they find that they take a little bit of a rest during the middle of the day. And we've actually seen that in our trail cameras, that between noon and 2, and I know there's a lot of you out there who are going to say, well, I see on my trail cameras all the bucks move during the middle of the day. There's so many factors for that. But where bucks are somewhat unpressured, and bucks have enough pressure though to be slotted into certain areas, and then they can hold there during the day and they're not being bumped, then what I find is that they're moving a lot during the morning. And there's times where I've had 13 buck sits up to 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock, and then I'll see 3 bucks in the afternoon. So they're moving a lot during the morning, and I'm always looking at my next morning rut stand, getting into that spot. And that's what happened great last year, 2 morning sits, 2 sits, 2 bucks. Now, all that doesn't take place if you don't preserve it. So if you're hunting that stand location too early in October, you're hunting it before the rut begins. Now, if you're hunting it during the pre-rut and you don't have any mature bucks around yet, your trail cameras are not showing that you have bucks around, you're waiting for bucks, non-core bucks, to come onto your land during the peak rut, then you're going to have some poor luck too. You're waiting for those bucks to come on the land. They're not there yet. And so it's really important that you preserve that stand. What I find too is that I think with whitetails that they recognize there's so many visual cues and scent that they take off that they can look at. They can come into an area, and if you've overpressured it, then you're not going to have the does, fawns, young bucks in that area. They're not going to be leaving any sign. There's going to be poor pellet counts, urine scent, rubs, scrapes. There's not going to be a lot of visual signs to serve as a welcome mat for that mature buck that's coming onto your property. So if you've overhunted it, you've pressured the area, you've pushed the deer out in general, then you're just not going to experience that great hunt that you should have otherwise had if you hadn't pressured it. So preserve those great morning rut cruising setups that you choose far in advance, and that'll pay off. Number 3, all those morning spots, if you're sitting on a small food plot, if you're sitting on food in general, if you're close to ag land, if you're close to that edge, then you're probably not going to experience a great hunt during that morning rut time, and whether it's a morning or not, but you're probably not going to experience that great hunt if you have to walk through food, spook the deer out. And what I found, my best rut cruising spots relate to bedding areas in some way. Now, it's not that they don't move parallel to food. It's not that they don't relate to food in some way during the middle of the day. But I find that a lot of food sources are overpressured. They're open. They don't have a lot of cover on them. Ag fields, for example, unless it's corn. But I find that a lot of those open areas and a lot of those people areas just don't serve to hold the oldest bucks in the neighborhood. So the majority of the bucks that I've shot, the oldest bucks I've shot there in that 4 to 7 year old age class, have been shot relating to bedding area movement. Bedding to bedding, closer to on the back side of bedding where I'm waiting for deer to come back to me in the morning. Perfect rut cruising setup when you're waiting for deer to come back to a bedding area in the morning on a stand that you've preserved at the right timing for a buck that you're after, either a core buck or a non-core buck. Now, a lot of those access points that I get to, they're hard to get to. I remember in the UP, some of my favorite spots were crossing beaver dams and walking in 45 minutes. Same with public land in Ohio, where I had to walk 45 minutes, go down a steep ridge, go out on a bench. And they weren't great buck cruising spots because they were easy to get to and easy for everyone else to get to. And even on private land, I find that the spots that are hardest to get to are the spots that you don't access very often. And pretty interesting how it ends up that a lot of times those hard to reach spots and those spots that you haven't been to for a long time, sometimes weeks or even months, they hold the mature bucks and they end up being great rut cruising spots. It is amazing how mature bucks slot into the movements with the least amount of pressure, even if that means slotting over 300 yards on your land. A lot of times, over the years, the 12 years we had the one parcel that I hunted, I shot 17 bucks on that parcel, nice bucks, mature bucks. Average age was over 4 and close to 5. And on those bucks, I shot those bucks out of 17 bucks out of 14 different stands. So I learned that the quality and the opportunity to hunt a fresh stand was way more important than hunting our quote best stand. We did have a best stand on the property that produced a lot of bucks, but I found the fresh stand was always the best stand. Never get locked into that your best stand on the property is the last spot you shot a buck. The best stand on your property should always be the next spot you shoot a nice mature buck out of. Have a short memory, and a lot of times those are hard access, hard to reach locations, and it's amazing how when you set that up and you plan for it, how those end up becoming really good rut cruising spots. Now, number 5, no scent worries. A lot of times, whether you're accessing the stand location and you're not leaving a scent signature because there's low grass, there's low potential, we're walking on a rocky 2-track in the middle of the woods, you're getting into a stand location where you don't expect deer downwind of you, and then when you're on that stand location, you have a great scent that blows off, especially in the morning, and it blows off, and the deer rarely, if ever, can ever get downwind of you. And so when you're on stand, you're completely safe. You're in a location where you're not leaving a scent signature in an area where deer can even walk across. And then you have low vegetation on the way in where you're not leaving any scent. So a lot of times when you're pre-planning these rut cruising setups, you're looking at a situation where not only you're not leaving scent on the way in and out, you're not blowing your scent towards bedding areas or deer areas on the way in or out. But once on stand, it doesn't matter how much you smell, how much you sweat on the way in, if you wash your clothes or not. I encourage you to wash them because then you're not going to leave a scent signature. Encourage you to spray down. But you're taking your scent out of the equation. The rut cruising stand setup that I shot the 2 bucks out of this year, when the wind is blowing in that morning from the east, there is no way that a deer can ever smell my scent downwind. It doesn't matter how much I smell. There's absolutely zero way that they can smell me downwind because it blows freely across the top of a ridge point. I'm above that point, so the wind can blow in my face. It has to blow from east, southeast, or east. It can't. Northeast is okay, east, northeast, but something easterly, and then it blows off that ridge point so that there's no way the deer can smell me. So my scent is completely taken out of the equation. And that equals, and that's part of the ingredient for having a great rut cruising setup, because then you can sit there, you don't have to worry about the scent, you don't have to worry about it ruining your hunt. And let's face it, you're preserving that stand. You've planned many months in advance. You're waiting for the perfect weather. You've preserved it. You get into that stand, you expect success. You don't want to ruin it because deer can get you downwind, and you don't want to depend on a, quote, scent elimination, anything to reduce your scent. You want, now it might be that you use that as a backup, but the bottom line is it starts with that stand location, and that'll eliminate the scent for you. Now, this is something that to me is very underrated. Your stand access and your stand use has to be completely dead quiet. So if you have a stand location where you have to make a lot of noise getting in, you have to walk through a lot of crunchy leaves down a big face in an open hollow, if you have to walk across an icy area, an icy patch, or an icy swamp, if you have to walk across a creek, make a lot of noise, then it might not be a great rut cruising stand, because a lot of times that noise is projecting out 200 yards. Deer can hear you in all directions. And then once you're at your stand, let's say you get there quietly, how many of you have squeaky stands out there? How many of you you're using a climber, which on small properties is almost a sin. You can't get away with a climber on 40 acres when you're trying to sneak in and not spook deer that are 100 to 200 yards away, because they're that close and things are that tight. Dylan and I snuck in on my buck for the secondary rut last year, and I am so careful with all the noise that we make with the camera gear and getting into the stand. And I bet you that it took, it was painstaking. And Dylan's filming right now. You think it took us 20 minutes to get set up, Dylan? At least?
Easy 20 minutes.
Yeah, and so to set the camera arm, set the camera stand in there, we were so slow. We worked together. I'm putting that in, trying not to make any noise, because I knew there was a chance that deer were bedded just 70 yards on the other side of the ridge. And lo and behold, that's where the doe came from. That's where the buck came from. And I feel if we would have made some noises and clings that are typical of a lot of tree stand setups, we would have ruined that hunt before it even started. Because if you're clearing deer at 200 yards with noise, then why would you expect deer to come back into that window just a few hours later? So having noise-free access, scent-free, noise-free stand, scent-free stand location, noise and scent, which can you say is more important? And then you have quiet gear. We have to have quiet gear. This year, Sitka released their new Quiet Fanatic series line, where they eliminated the amount of sound that the clothing actually projects by cutting the distance in half, or doubling the distance that deer can hear from you, but cutting the amount of noise that gear makes in half. So quiet gear, quiet stands, quiet access, just as important as scent-free. And think about how many deer that you could spook actually potentially 200 yards away just by having a noisy stand entrance. Now, number 7, typically I find that you have limited shot distances. And this isn't, indicative of every great rut cruising setup and stand setup location. But at the same time, with those setups and that limited shot distance, a lot of times that's reflective of the area you're in. So if you can shoot 100 yards or 150 yards, it's probably too open. And where I was at, I had a muzzleloader for the secondary rut. I could have taken a bow and shot that same buck in that same situation, because with the muzzleloader, I could still only shoot about 50, 60 yards at the most. And I shot those 2 deer out of that setup between 25 and 30 yards, both of them. I think the one was 20, the other one's probably 25, just 5 yards behind it. So often with a rut cruising setup, if you can't shoot very far, that probably means you're in the right direction and you're in the right spot for a rut cruising setup, because I find that mature bucks hug the thickest amount of cover, even if it's along the thick cover line or within that thick cover line. But a lot of times, if you can shoot a long ways, it's probably not a great rut cruising setup. Now, number 8, doesn't have to be the perfect tree. And again, like this stand that we shot this year, that we scouted last year, that we shot the 2 bucks from, we only hunted that stand twice. Those deer have zero clue that we're in that area. We don't overpressure the stands. Even if we hunted it 3 or 4 times last year, they wouldn't have a clue. And so I typically have 8 to 9 stands on a 40-acre parcel. We might hunt a couple of them 4 or 5 times, maybe 6 times at the most for a 3.5-month season. We might hunt 1 or 2, none at all, and then we hunt a lot 2 or 3 times. So that rut cruising setup, we are in a very skinny spruce tree. It was something, if either one of us moved, it kind of rocks back and forth. And it wasn't the perfect tree, but it was the perfect location to hang a tree stand, and there's a difference. A lot of my stands I've sat in are skinny, twisted, ugly, don't have a lot of cover. But when you don't hunt them very often, it doesn't really matter because the deer are never used to you sitting in them, and it's pretty easy to get away with a lot of movement and trying to get into position when the deer are never used to you being in that location. It's a complete and ultimate surprise. Now, number 9, this is really important, and this goes back to your access, blowing your scent, and being able to get in and out invasively. You're typically hunting the side of the movement, not in the movement. So I see a lot of stand locations that once you get there, deer are easily downwind of you a lot. You're a lot of times getting into deer as you're walking in. You're walking through deer trails to get to a stand location. So you're either leaving your scent behind, you're leaving your scent on the way in, you're spooking deer on the way in because it's in the middle of the movement, and you're blowing your scent into movement behind you. So being at the side of the movement and positioning yourself that you have, like in our case, a steep face. When I went in to shoot my bow buck, and when I went to, I think it was November 4th or 3rd, I can't remember the exact date, but it was the first time going into that stand. It's very steep. Deer don't really typically walk on that steep face. There's a lot of brush constrictions. So I literally fell flat on my face getting into that stand location. So it was a difficult access. I fell, but at the same time, I was positioning myself that I could walk through a non-deer area, get to the stand location, and then the deer movement should be, for the most part, on the uphill side and on the area that was level, where deer could move back and forth in front of me and not behind me. So I was exactly on the side of the movement. Now, number 10, once you have the perfect rut cruising setup and stand location set up and picked out, and you've built it and you've created that movement or you've recognized that movement, it really helps to have 1 or 2 complementary stands nearby. There's a lot of times that we have stand locations that are 50 to 60 yards apart from each other, and it makes it very easy for us to get in and out of multiple stand locations with multiple access routes and being able to hunt the same movement. Might be 100 yards away, it might be 50 yards away, but that allows us to chip away non-invasively at the same movement, and knowing that if a mature buck is in that area, we are going to get him out of one of those stands. We had another stand about 70 yards from the one that I sat in. In fact, I've actually never hunted out of, but my hunting partner, Rich, shot 2 bucks out of that stand this year. And I believe 3 sits, it could have been 2 sits, but very limited sits, and he shot his 2 bucks, one with a bow, one with a gun. And that's what I did, one with a bow, one with a muzzleloader. And it's the same movement. It's a great spot. We have a few great areas on that. Again, we're out here really trying to scout this other parcel right here. We haven't taken full advantage of the movements on this parcel. We're going to try to this year. We're going to pick out that great stand location for rut cruising setup. We've already installed run redneck ghillie blind back in there. We're going to install a couple more family tradition stands back in the woods on a narrow funnel here. We have to get in from well on the side. We have to go uphill to get in there. We have to side hill. We have to go around the deer movement during the dark. Then we have to wait for those deer to get into us. It's going to be a tough one to get to. It's going to be worth it. We're here in early March picking out the perfect rut cruising stand set up on this location. It worked out really well on the property, the other property nearby. And I hope these 10 tips can help you this year. These have worked many times for me in the past. I encourage you, if you're not a morning hunter, to try that. That's one of these tips out of these 10 that I think is really important to up your game and enjoy this year. The rut is still several months away, but boy, it comes very quickly, and I can't wait to hear about it. Follow along on this channel. Make sure you subscribe so you don't miss any of the YouTube videos that I'm putting up. We're putting up an average about 1 every day and a half, every 2 days. And you can bet as we get closer to the rut, we'll have a lot of rut strategies. I have my rut forecast coming out soon. And enjoy the off season because it goes by quickly. The hunt will be here soon, and I can't wait. I hope you're ready too.